Welcome to Moviemind. My name's Nick Bracks, and this is a podcast where we have real conversations with real people and give real advice. Unfortunately, many kids go through adversity, but what are we doing to help them? How are we educating them in mental health? Clearly, more needs to be done. The system's archaic, and we need people like my next guest to continue the work they're doing. Margo Ward is the founder and CEO of KidsXpress Life. Her vision and inspiration for this world-first program was bestowed upon her by the children she worked with as the head of play therapy at the Sydney Children's Hospital. While working predominantly with chronically ill children within Oncology and ICU, she saw the opportunity to broaden the scope of creative approaches to therapy with children, and she began to develop a new model for looking at trauma and grief counselling. It's such important work that Margo's doing. We got to chat in depth about it. I got to learn about her story, which is phenomenal. She's been through so many different things, and it's another example. I love these kind of guests. It's another example where everything that she's been through, every experience that she had, led to this greater vision. And it's like I talk about a lot on the podcast. As John Lennon said, life only makes sense backwards but must be lived forwards, and Margo embodies this. I hope you enjoy. Thank you again for supporting us, and another reminder that the Moviemind book is now available globally. You can find all of the links at nickbracks.com/book, and you can join the Moviemind community by going to moviemind.me. And finally, we're also selling under Bracks. We've relaunched it. We're donating $1 from every pair to mental health, and you can find the link for that at www.underbracks.com. Margo, thank you so much for making the time to come on my podcast, and apologies again for cancelling on you last week. I've been sort of travelling on the other side of the world and time zones and blah, blah, blah. Not good for your mental health, but I'm glad to be here with you right now.
Oh, Nick, it's a delight. And you know what? This is 2022, and I think we've just all got to be accommodating of life changing at the last minute. And after the last couple of years, we've probably got more appreciation of that than what we ever have. So it's just really wonderful to have the opportunity to chat with you.
Exactly. I think we're more sort of adaptable than ever to things changing last minute and things not going to plan and all that sort of thing. So that's one good thing and technology. I mean, being able to, do this podcast and speak to people all over the world and things that come with that. I think it's, there's some positives that have come out of it for sure.
Oh, look, I'm such a nana on so many things, Nick. I'd never actually used Zoom or podcasts or anything before 2020. So it's been a huge,
Right.
It wasn't a learning curve. It was just straight up for me. So, there's every chance that this will go wrong because I'll touch the wrong thing at the wrong time. But it is wonderful, though. I think that connection now that we have, or we have the ability to have with people around the world, I think that's been, that's a really wonderful thing.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it just makes the world so much smaller and more accessible. It is such a great thing, such a good thing that's come out of it all. So before we get into it, are you able to give us, our listeners, a background on yourself and what you do and how you came to where you are now?
Yeah, sure. Well, it's quite a story in many ways. So I'm founder and CEO of an organisation called KidsXpress, which is a children's mental health organisation. So I established KidsXpress in 2005 on the back of many years working coalface in working with children impacted by trauma and adversity, predominantly through a health model. So we are a children's mental health organisation. What we do is incredibly colourful and playful in that we use the expressive therapies, dance therapy, music therapy, art therapy, drama therapy to support children. But we do it in an evidence-based, nationally accredited, internationally recognised as best practice of working with children, as well as we have a wraparound model that supports all the caregiving community that supports our kids. So our parents, our grandparents, our teachers, our coaches, we have a school program. So we are an organisation, I guess, that has really pioneered expressive therapy in Australia. But how I got to that is quite an eclectic, I have a very eclectic career. To go right back to the origins, as you can probably already hear, I'm a Kiwi girl. So I was born in the depths of Southland in New Zealand. My father was an All Black. My mother was a pioneering physiotherapist at the time. I'm the youngest of 9 children. I've got a massive family who are all, apart from a couple of nephews, all living back in New Zealand. But growing up in such a large family, I was actually quite isolated in terms of I was brought up in a remote farm, and a lot of my family actually went to boarding school or away from the family home at that time. So whilst being immersed in this huge family, I was actually, as a child, was quite isolated. And I also had a chronic illness in terms of asthma as a child. So in those times, spent a huge amount of time in hospital by myself. Parents were allowed to visit, or family was allowed to visit 2 hours a day on a Sunday. So I had I guess in many ways was brought up with my own adversity and trauma in many ways as well. And so really my career and how I got to KidsXpress is I trained as a nurse when I was in New Zealand. I travelled overseas and then trained as a teacher. Decided that really wasn't quite enough for me. And whilst I was living in London, I found a new career, a new thing called play therapy, and was very fortunate to engage with Great Ormond Street and learn about play therapy while I was there. Being a Kiwi girl, as we all do, and I think as a lot of Australians do as well, I was on a massive tour in terms of travel and absorbing myself through all the different opportunities that travel gives you. And that's actually a really important part, because one of those travel things was on a Kentucky tour that I went around Europe, which comes back into my career. But when I came to live in Australia, worked in various different industries, but then landed on an amazing opportunity to be head of play therapy at Sydney Kids Hospital. At that time, it's many, many years ago, Nick, I'm much older now, but at the time, play therapy was seen as paints and Play-Doh and something to entertain children. And I already knew at that point it was far more than that, far more than that. And so really pioneered play therapy in Australia, and the momentum of that knowledge really started to grow throughout Australia, but particularly in the house setting during that time. So for 10 years, headed up the play therapy, both at Sydney Kids Hospital, and then pioneered it in different aspects in Australia. The really important aspect of that in my career is, whilst I was head of the department, so a leader, I was also clinically involved in chronic illness groups. So in particular, oncology, and specialising in palliative care, ICU, child protection. And the beauty of this is we as an organisation today, as KidsXpress, children at the heart of everything that we do. And my work at that time as a play therapist when I was at Sydney Kids gave me the opportunity to work with children, particularly children who were dying, putting them at the centre and helping and supporting them to express what was happening to them or what was going to happen to them, in particular children who were in pain with anxiety and knew they were not long for this earth. My work was to support them, and when they were physically unable to engage in modalities, being whether it be play or music or dance, I would use their imagination. And children years apart would imagine this place, a place they could go where they could sing and dance and throw paint. And every child would come out of this imagery saying, Margo, why isn't this place real? Why isn't there a place where we can go outside of our family, the school, our hospital, where we can express what's happening to us and work out what's happening without always having to put words to it, and it has people there to help us. And so in those very early days, those 10 years at the hospital, this vision of a place called the Silver Sanctuary grew. And it was like a silver castle, and it had all these rooms, and it was completely child orientated. And every child I worked with added on a different dimension. And the importance of this many, many times was the reminding of children how important this vision was. And one of the things I always remember is being called to a little 8-year-old boy's room one day. And it was his final day on this earth. And one of his last words were to me to say, Margo, that place that we imagined, that place where we could sing and dance and throw paint, it needs to exist for all children that hurt, and you have to do it. So in my darkest days and the hardest days in running a business, I remember him and go, yeah, it has to exist. And then my career took a really odd part. So here I am having this amazing experience with these children and this vision building, and having these opportunities and leadership to lead and pioneer and do all these things that I love. And for some odd reason, which I only now understand, I decided to leave that role and go and work in a national suicide prevention role. And it was a completely different field in many ways, foster and help, very different. And I remember the CEO of the kids hospital sitting me down saying, Margo, what are you doing? Like, why are you leaving? And the only thing I could come up with at the time was, are they going to give me a car? That was it. That was the only reason at that time I could logically think, why am I doing this? And then in that role, working in suicide prevention, my job was to travel to regional remote areas and talk about depression and suicide and bring communities together to have a conversation, to educate, have a conversation, and to support each other. And what was amazing was every adult that I worked with who had been in crisis, was in crisis, had lost a loved one or had a loved one in crisis, it would all go back to childhood. The abuse, the neglect, the domestic violence, the illness, the loss of somebody. And all of a sudden, this started to make sense. All those adults validated the children's vision. And this, I'm talking many years, this is 20 years ago, and we didn't have the knowledge that we have today. So at the time, I was like, I can't ignore this. I can't ignore this. And so this vision, what I called the Silver Sanctuary for a very long time, for 13 years, was a dream that I had. And it was just a dream. I was a really good therapist and I loved what I did. And I kept thinking about this place that you know, the children had told me that needed to exist. And on New Year's Eve 2005, I remember being on a hill somewhere watching the Sydney fireworks, and I remember really dramatically letting go of this vision, saying to the children, I'm sorry, kids, I don't know how to do this. I'm not a businesswoman. I don't know how to make this happen. But I am a huge believer in serendipity in life, in terms of you do the work, you lay the foundations, and then life will conspire. If it's meant to happen, it will. And literally 3 months later, I went to an old friend's 40th, and his name is a guy called Paul Hines. He is an insurance broker, owns an insurance company called General Security Australia. He was on that Kentucky tour going around Europe, and I went to his 40th.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, this is how important that tripping around Europe was. He was on that tour, and at his 40th, I took him out for dinner not long after that, and he's a man that likes to ask the difficult questions. And he said to me, so Margo, do you think what you're doing now is actually going to save the life of a child? And I had to say no, but I know what will. And so I shared the vision with him of what was called the Silver Sanctuary at the time. And I still have the email that he sent me the next day saying, don't give up your day job just yet, but we're going to make this happen. And so between the two of us, we brought the business world and the welfare world in. And today, 18 years later, we have a evidence-based, internationally recognised, growing business that is not only looked as a pioneer and leader, but is leading in terms of children's mental health, and particularly expressive therapy and the trauma-informed. So, my life starting in those very early origins of that, little girl on the farm that, used to get on a pony and ride for miles, and part of a big family, and then having those opportunities to engage with other families and other communities and travel around the world. It's all come together to be today, to be very proudly the CEO and founder of KidsXpress, leading a thriving business that really every single day is having a dramatic difference in the children and families and communities they work with. And then I look to the future and go, there's so much more to do. And there's so much we have to collectively do. So, like I said, I'm a believer in serendipity, and I think all the aspects of my life, there's been such a serendipitous connection to what is, and just trusting and believing in that, I think has, it's been something that's absolutely underpinned how I live and work every day.
Wow. Well, thank you so much for sharing all of that. And there's so many things in there. I mean, too many things probably to touch on in just one interview, but I mean, such an amazing story. And what I also love about your personal story is, I guess, like, it's a thing I've talked about in quite a few interviews where we often, it's in hindsight, it's sort of like the saying, life only makes sense backwards, but has to be lived forwards. And we can't sort of really know how everything will connect at the time necessarily, but if you can sort of trust in yourself and keep moving forward and just making those steps, things do eventually connect, but you don't really know how, and it's a tricky thing to navigate. But I think it's such an amazing example of that in just how everything came together for you.
Yeah, and I think that's, I love that saying, Nick. I think it's so important as well, because I think we try and plan so many things, and I think you do need to have a plan, but you've also got to be open to that at any given moment that plan's going to change for the good or for the better. One of my other favourites is this too shall pass. So this too shall, the highs, the lows, the medium, the, whatever you want to think about in any aspect of your life, no matter what it is, this too shall pass. And knowing that it will pass, whether it goes from good to bad or otherwise, I think that now more than any other time is something that I think every single one of us needs to embrace. Because one of the things I get very concerned about, Nick, in terms of our children is I hear so many times, and I've heard so many times, we just want our kids to be happy. And I'm like, is that all? Because if we just want our kids to be happy, our kids will do anything they possibly can to make those adults in their world believe that they're happy. But we want our children to be able to healthily express all their emotions, the sadness, the excitement, the joy, the anger. We need our children, we as adults, the adults of the future, we need to be able to help them. So if happiness is the only thing we want them to be, that's very one-dimensional. And human beings are not one-dimensional. And if you ever ask a child, happiness is not the only thing they want to be. They're so much more than that.
Yeah. And also, what does happiness actually mean? We're taught that it's following a formula and doing all these things that we're meant to do, and it doesn't really work that way. It's not a simple thing, and life's complicated, and like you said, we need to be able to feel the emotions, express them, and we're not taught how to do that. I mean, our parents often don't know how to do it. Teachers often don't know how to do it. So how on earth are the kids meant to understand how to actually do that?
Yeah, exactly. And understanding what's also behind some of those emotions. So, people will label children, people will try and behaviourally manage children. Children are only ever trying to connect. Like their little brains are trying to work out life. They're trying to feel safe, particularly if they've experienced adversity or trauma. They're going to challenge it, but they're going to try and find a way to feel safe. And so when children's behaviour, whether that's been aggressive or whether that's been withdrawn, they're trying to connect, and they need to feel safe in that connection. So even like we were talking about being able to connect online, etc., but doing that in a really healthy way, that's so critically important to our kids.
Yeah, it really is. And without it, it's, where do you put all of that? What do you do? And I guess, what are the implications of not having that outlet for kids and adults, I guess, from what you've seen? If we don't have anywhere to put these emotions, we can't talk about it, express it, where can that lead to?
Well, I think I'll take a slight in terms of talking about children's mental health. So, prior to 2020, we as an organisation would struggle to get people to put children and mental health in the same sentence. And even now, we still need to be careful in terms of how we do that. But it's so critically important. All the evidence globally indicates to prevention needs to be in childhood. There's a study called Adverse Childhood Experiences, ACEs, which clearly indicates adversity and trauma on children. And we all need some adversity to build our resilience and our ability to cope and our well-being. That's absolutely critical. But when it gets to more than 4 ACEs, we know that there's significant harm both in the short term and long term. So long term into adolescence, youth, into adulthood, in terms of the impact of that. So we know that what we have believed for such a long time, I often get the comment from people, do we need to focus on children? Don't we just wait until they're an adolescent and we see if there's a problem and then we try and fix it then? Now that we know so much about the brain and how the brain develops, and we know that for many young people, waiting until there's a problem is just too late. It's all about the neuroplasticity, what we know about the brain, how that works. For many, it is then too late. We then try and do it in adulthood, it's even harder. It's never too late, but our opportunity to change the dial in terms of our mental health is actually in childhood. So when we talk about early intervention in terms of there being an issue is incredibly important. When we talk about prevention, in my opinion, we need to be focusing on childhood. We need to be focusing on kids under 12, right towards when they're, even before they're born. We need to be focusing on children as a prevention model. If we ignore childhood, which we are doing and have been doing for a long time, if we ignore children as they won't remember, which is also a classic, I find that comment just so naive, because the one thing we've all been is a child. So how can we continue to say, oh, children won't remember? Because if we as adults really sit in that uncomfortable space, regardless of what's happened in our childhood, we will remember. And we can also often paint that pathway. When I spoke earlier about working with people in suicide prevention, in having deep and uncomfortable conversations with people who either had been in crisis or were in crisis, when they'd go back to childhood, they would talk about, well, this happened and this is how I felt, but nobody acknowledged it. And that ability to be able to healthily express things as they happen is so critically important to who we'll be as adults. The evidence, there's so much evidence in this space. So it's so important that when we look at childhood, we look at the whole child, not just the physical child, but we look at the emotional, the well-being and the mental health of children. And then we need to look at what a child's well-being, a child's mental health, and what children's mental illness looks like as well, and what we need to do to put a construct around that too. If we don't do that, Nick, my big concern at the moment is we don't do that. We are not going to change the dial in with our young people and our adults if we don't seriously start focusing and investing in our children in a way that is actually spoken through a child's language. And in my opinion and my experience over the many years and those that work for me, we know the safest way to work with children is through the creative modalities, because it is their language and it is all about them and their ability to connect and heal and communicate with the rest of the world.
Thank you so much for supporting Move Your Mind. We're expanding the offerings of the organisation and we're tailoring everything we do to suit you guys and to try and answer to all of your needs and the questions that you send in. The book is available globally. You can find all of the links at nickbracks.com/book. And we've just released the Move Your Mind community. We've currently got a men's community group, a women's community group, a general group. We're going to be loading up other groups, and you can find all of the links at moveyourmind.me. This group's been created based on the needs of what we've heard and learnt throughout running Move Your Mind. And we have live events, we've got courses, we've got huge amounts of value, the ability to share information, share ideas, work in groups together to grow and share your learnings, to learn about different topics. You get email reminders. There's a whole lot of features in there. We're constantly updating it, and we're so excited to share it with you. You can find all of the information about it at moveyourmind.me.
So yeah, everything you're saying, I totally agree with. And I think about that a lot. And what I do with Move Your Mind and in the mental health advocacy, the big thing I sort of rant on about all of the time is how no long-term change is going to be made in this area unless we can address kids' mental health, and unless they can change, how we get taught at schools, parenting, that whole thing. And I think what you were saying before, it really resonates with me when, saying, oh, kids won't remember, or we'll wait and see if there's a problem. That's when we're getting programmed, and that's when we're getting taught all of these different things that become so much harder to undo. And I guess, would you say it's almost like building a house and not building the foundation properly, and you're sort of whacking it together and saying, oh no, it should be okay, hopefully it'll, if it falls down, we'll fix it then, and expecting there not to be problems in the future. It's like, there will be problems. You haven't built the house properly.
Yeah. Oh, Nick, that's such a great visual, right? For people to understand. It is absolutely like building a house, and we're not laying the foundations right and deeply for our kids, for the complexity of adulthood. When we become young people, when we become adults, life is complex, and it's more complex for our children now than what it ever has been. But I love that analogy. If we don't deeply embed and seek to understand the impact in terms of our words, our actions, the environment for our children, the impact of adversity, then we are never going to have a house that's going to stand up to the storm. We're just not. And I think it's so, and even in our work that we have a centre-based program here at KidsXpress, where we do individual, group and dyad therapy, as well as our school-based program. And so when we've got our therapists and our therapists working with the children, and then our trauma-informed consultants working with the teaching or the school community, as well as the parents, these light bulbs, these absolute, I didn't know that. I didn't know how I physically approached a child, or how I spoke in a particular way to a child, or how a child's behaviour was actually connection seeking. When you change the framework with the knowledge, you see people operating very differently around children, and therefore you see children being able to self-regulate, being able to calm. We have children at the moment that we have 1 out of 4 children before COVID had experienced toxic stress or were experiencing toxic stress. I'm very concerned around what that now might be. We have children who the level of anxiety in our schools to transition from a playground into a classroom is extreme. We're ignoring that, thinking, oh, they'll get over it. Well, you know what? They might appear to get over it, but you can guarantee that's going to turn up later. And you can down the layers and layers and layers that are going to exist by the time that child, they might be 5 now, by the time they're 15, by the time they're 25, by the time they're 55.
No.
How hard is it to change that? So I cannot agree with you more. The analogy of let's build the house better. We need to, and the evidence is there. That's what infuriates me. The evidence is actually there globally around that the prevention model, and early intervention is critically important. I'm not saying that, working with adolescents, etc., that's also critically important. But like you said, if we're going to change it, if we're going to change the reality, then let's focus on where the change can occur. And that is in childhood.
Yeah. It just need to completely change how the conversation is. And it is an odd thing that, parents or adults think that way because they were kids. We're all kids once ourselves. We're a human, it's like we're still the same person. And we think that automatically, you become an adult and things are all different and better and we get over it. It's like, no, most adults are suppressed because it's not their fault. I'm trying to undo still all these. I'm highly aware of it and still struggling with so many conditioning things and suppression and, things that have been embedded into me because it's so deeply embedded. But how else is it going to change? It's just, it's crazy. And it's, this, I guess, and I love the fact you're talking about the creative outlets and, the different things that you do with the kids, because I think that's just one of the best ways to connect and come out of that. And I got into acting quite later in life, and I found it was the best personal development, mental health thing I could have ever done, and couldn't recommend it more. And I remember the very first class I was terrified, and the acting teacher said, you've got to now unlearn everything you've been taught for the last 25 years. If you want to actually be able to do this. And I didn't really understand at that point what they were talking about. But then as I went through it, I was like, wow, okay, yeah, you really do if you want to be able to. And then, so the benefits that came out of it were dramatic, and I just couldn't believe it. Yeah.
Yeah. Even on that, like just your example of being told to be in it, you're going to have to unlearn everything that you've learned. And I don't think there's ever been an intent of, people that cared for us didn't want us to be the best that we could. We didn't have the knowledge then, but we have the knowledge now. So using the creative modalities is such an incredibly powerful, liberating, safe way to work with kids. And when you actually sit in that space with them, you learn so much about yourself. If you're truly engaged with a child, whether that be in a therapy session, and that's obviously all focused on the child, or just in general, you learn so much more about yourself. And I think that's one of the injustices we've done as a society. We also don't place the importance on the arts, and what that does for our mental health and well-being is so incredibly important. It does help us connect. It does all those wonderful and beautiful things. But it's also, you also said a really interesting point around being human. And we forget we're human. Sometimes we're so automated in what we do, and we think we just follow a process and we're not curious enough about it. We need to be more curious about ourselves and where the origins of some of our behaviours and some of our beliefs come from. I personally think we need to constantly challenge ourselves on that and be curious about that. Because when you engage with a child, they are constantly curious about their relationship with you, their relationship with themselves, their relationship with their environment. And it's a little bit more simplistic. We as adults make that more confusing, I think, than what it needs to be. You know, for me personally, and this can be a little bit controversial, I don't necessarily refer to myself as a feminist as such. And whilst I believe in equal and all that sort of stuff, but being a humanist and believing in the rights of being human, regardless of what gender you are, I think that's just so incredibly important. And that's something else that when you look at children, they don't see themselves. Yes, we're all different, and you know, males and females might process or live life or engage in life in different ways, but we are human. And if we truly valued human and being humankind, then I think we can also help to change that dial. You know, I see young people now, and even adults, 50, 60-year-olds still seeking purpose. I believe we all have the same purpose, Nick. Our purpose, we are humankind, and our purpose in life is to be both human and kind to the very best of our ability. We also message that to children, then we don't create the divide from a very young age.
My name's Nick Bracks, and I'm a storyteller who has dedicated my entire adult life to creating positive conversations around mental health. In recent years, discussions around mental health have become less taboo and entered the mainstream vernacular. I've delivered over 1,000 mental health seminars around the globe, including several TED Talks, and I believe we all have a story to tell. In my book, Moviemind, I cover my story and stories from people that inspire me, as well as insights from world-leading mental health experts. This book will help you to learn how to recognise mental health issues before they become a problem. Use your personal challenges as motivators, take ownership of your well-being, and create new daily habits that increase happiness and reduce stress.
I think that's such a great message, because, you know, it's great with all of the progression, you know, that has happened, but I think, you know, it has gone too far where it's, you know, it's such a confusing world now. It's like, am I allowed, what can I say? What can't I say? What can I do? What am I, you know, it almost makes you scared to do anything, where at the end of the day, like you were saying, I couldn't agree more. We're all human. I think the point is to just try and help each other and try and support each other and do what we can to better ourselves. But
if we operated from a humankind perspective, then every decision we'd make would be do no harm, because we're being human and kind. And I think from obviously my focus is on childhood, and in particular with KidsXpress, it's because of adversity and trauma. But if we really did focus on that, being humankind and doing no harm, I just wonder what difference we could make in the world, because we can't continue the way we're going. I fear now what we are seeing on the ground in terms of being 2022, the impact of COVID. We're only really now starting to see the impact of all that, isolation and everything that we were asked to do in the last 2 years. Children are only just feeling safe now to really start talking about what that was like for them. And it's only really just, so we're now starting to see, I think, a next pandemic in terms of mental health, and it's starting really young. We're not waiting. Yes, it's there for adolescents, but we see it in children. And I was saying before, the anxiety that children have, let alone the trauma and adversity they may have experienced as well, we need to be focusing on them, because otherwise, I fear for the next 5 years, 10 years, what's actually going to be happening in our society.
Yeah, and how big of a part do you think technology, social media and things like that play as well?
Yeah, when I said before that I think children, life is more complex, and it's more complex for children because our children are engaging very young in terms of social media. I think it has its place. However, its place is not to replace relationship and connection in a physical sense and an emotional sense. And unfortunately, that's what I'm seeing, is that, or what we are seeing, it is replacing connection that is actually fundamental to our emotional and mental growth. And it shouldn't be replacing that. We need to, it has its, I'm not saying, oh, we shouldn't be doing it at all. It absolutely has its place. Technology is going to continue to grow. It's going to continue to be part of our life. But when it replaces relationship, when it becomes something that we do instead of actually physically, emotionally, mentally engaging with another human being, that's when it becomes a problem. And that's what we are seeing. Because also our brains cannot cope with our tabs being constantly open, and neither can our kids. Our kids, they just do not have that capacity. So when we see children who are incredibly distracted and really struggle to engage and struggle to self-regulate, then putting them in front of the screen constantly, that's not helping. We need them to be actively engaging through, because also when you use your emotions, you also need to use your body. If you're going to process emotions, you need to be able to use your body. If you're just sitting with the screen, that's also not helpful. But like I say, it has its place. It just shouldn't be replacing relationship and connection and communication at that more intimate level with the people that are important in your world. So for a child, it's your family, it's your friends, it's your teachers, it's your coaches, it's those people. We can't replace the screen. We can't replace a human with a screen.
Yeah, there needs to be that balance, which I think seems to be a long way off from finding, but need to find that.
Yeah. And I think I mentioned to you before, Nick, though, I also don't believe in balance. I think very early age, we're trying to get our kids to balance, life's got to look like this. And I think that's also an injustice we do to ourselves and to our young people and children, because balance has its own stress. If you're constantly trying to create this balance and you constantly feel like it's tipping or it's out of control, I don't think it's helpful. I personally use a pendulum swing. So for me, it's where life is going to force you to go to focus on. You need to allow that fluidity for it to do that, whether that be, sometimes it's health, sometimes it's family, sometimes it's education, sometimes it's career, no matter what it is. And knowing that it will flow, I think, is incredibly important, and being willing to let the flow. Like we say, life, what's that saying? If you want to make God laugh, I think it goes, if you want to make God laugh, tell him your plan. And whilst I'm not a religious person, I kind of think, well, yeah, as soon as you have a plan, you know that it's not necessarily going to work the way you want it. But I think having fluidity, knowing that we're not going to be able to create balance, we're going to have to go with the swing, it does take a bit of pressure off. It takes the pressure off to be this, because also when we're trying to be balanced and be that, I often wonder, are we being authentic? Because we're just appearing to have it all together. And adults don't have it all together, and our children are trying to work out what that is. And we as role models saying, oh, yes, I have this perfect balance. Is that authentic? I don't think so.
Well, it's not possible. It's literally, if you're human, as far as I'm aware, it's not possible. And you wouldn't want it to be possible, because then where would, life wouldn't be interesting. But I think there's so much pressure on us to have all of these boxes ticked. And, it's so hard. And even when you are doing something you care about, you're aware of it. I find it so hard with parents, for example. My latest one will be, I'm thinking, well, okay, they're getting older, and I'm a long way off having kids. When am I going to give them grandkids? When am I going to do this? When am I going to do that? Not because I ever want it, but it's got to tick the box to make everyone happy and appease everything. And it's like, hang on, I don't know, I can't control any of this stuff or when I'll do it, but I just know what I need to do right now. But you feel all these pressures, and it makes you miserable or burnt out, or you'll have a breakdown if you just keep trying to keep that complete balance all the time. Like you're saying, you can't, and we can't control, we also can't control how things are going to go. And if you can really find a way to embrace the chaos and just realize that, okay, I can't control anything, I'm just going to put my best foot forward every day. There's comfort in admitting that, and really, actually believing that and living by that, because then you got permission then just to let it happen, not have to, force everything.
And I think also that we should be, again, for our children, we should be role modeling to them that the picket fence with the, perfect marriage and the kids, etc., that might not happen. And I think that layering of the expectation we place on our kids places stress on our children, places stress on our young people to have it all, to have the career, to have the, whatever big fancy house and the whatever people think is important. At the end of the day, what's important is your health, and that's all aspects of your health, including your mental health, and your relationships. Like, really, where is the wealth in society? Does it not sit there? Does it not sit in your health, your whole health, and the relationships and how you show up in relationships? Like, I just think we've got this wrong, and I think the stress that creates now, but also will create in the future on our kids, is just, it's too difficult. So we need people like you that are advocating for a different way of being and taking that stress off. I don't, if I'm, again, to be honest, I don't have my own children. People will often assume that I do because of what I do. And that wasn't, for me, that was, I always wanted to have children. That was something that, if I'd had a plan when I was younger, that was definitely part of the plan, but not part of the plan. It might be in the future when I choose to foster, or depending what I choose in my future, but it doesn't have to look like the way we, our society says this makes you a success when you've got a successful marriage and a successful, etc. I love the fact that we are complex beings. And if we embrace the complexity, and as you said, the chaos, and accept that it's going to change, and accept that we have choice in how we engage with that chaos, because I think there's engaging with the chaos and then there's engaging with the drama. That can also be a bit difficult.
Yeah, different things. Yeah,
very different things. But I think that makes us a really wealthy human being. I don't think we're meant to be linear. I don't think we're meant to have, like I said before, this too shall pass, no matter what it is.
Mm-hmm.
And if we truly embrace that and show our children how to healthily embrace all those emotions, that kind of excites me as well. And whilst I've been talking about the damage that can occur, there's also a lot of positivity. So if we do lean into this, and when we do see children embrace it, it's so exciting to see our kids, I don't know, embrace it and live and love life in a very different way.
Yeah, no, 100%. And why, who made these rules about how life's meant to be lived? Like, I don't know who actually wrote these things or who came up with it. So it doesn't make sense. And life can evolve in so many different ways. So no, I think it's so many good points that you're making on that. So I guess for you on a personal level, what are some things that you do on a regular basis just to look after your own, mental health and well-being?
I think what's really important is I do have my own therapist. I think having somebody from a professional sense to talk to is incredibly important. I mean, particularly in terms of what I see and witness every day is often not, is very confronting. So that's really important. I walk, I'm very fortunate to live by a beach. I love walking every morning. It's something that I do, that I hold sacred. It's not for my physical health, it's more for my mental health more than anything else. I'm really clear on who I have in my life and who I trust and engage with. So I'm really fortunate, Nick, to have some pretty amazing people that uplift me or uphold me. And that's not being, they're my biggest cheer squad, but they're also very versed in telling me when I'm not doing something well or need to do something better, or can hold a space for me when life isn't going that great for me, when I am struggling with different things. So I'm very, very fortunate in having people in my life that I really trust. I think that the challenging thing for me is not being able to go home to my family. So I feel, at the moment, probably feel a little bit disjointed. I haven't been back to home. And even though I've lived in Australia now for many years, I still call New Zealand home. I regularly take time out where I do switch off everything and nothing can kind of get through. Also, I'm very technically challenged, so it kind of makes it easy for me to do that. But I think, I try and eat well. Like I'm quite ordered in many ways in terms of I put structures around how I eat, when I eat, sleep, all that sort of stuff, to make sure I can be the best I can. And I also share that came on the back of 7-8 years ago. I was very unwell. I had an autoimmune that really took over my life and almost ended it. So at that point, really realizing the impact of stress and that really unconscious stress and what that was doing to me. So I made some very conscious decisions then. But I think for me, the having those rituals is just so important. The walks, the food, the sitting in sun, all that sort of stuff is very important. I'd love to say I meditate. I would love to say I do that, but I don't, because I do it when I walk. It's not something I've mastered yet. Maybe I will at some point in my life. But I think the critical thing for me is my relationships. Investing time and energy and feeling safe in those has been something that I constantly do work on, and they do constantly change, but is something that I'm very aware and that I do invest on. That energy piece of who brings energy in and who takes in all that sort of stuff is something I work on constantly. And also I think fun. Whilst we do very, very serious work here, and what we hold at the core can be very traumatic, we do have a lot of fun. There's a lot of laughter, there's a lot of colour, there's a lot of just joy often as well. So I think bringing joy into your life, being a bit, bringing that origin of we were all children once, so we can be playful and childlike, and I think that's so important. I'm a really bad dancer, but I love to do it. It's something that I do enjoy doing, and I think it's those things, it's those really basic things of where the joy comes from, kind of keeps me sustained.
No, so many great things in there, and I think, like you said, not taking it too seriously, but also it is, I think the world is so nonstop, and you're obviously incredibly busy with what you're doing. It's so important to have those rituals and habits and daily things that we just block out to do for ourselves, because otherwise we will get burnt out, and that is a pretty common thing that happens. No one else is going to do it for you, and it's very hard to turn off these days. So I think all the points you're making are so important to stay on top of.
We will, we don't have this limitless supply of energy unless we orchestrate life to have a constant. But I think knowing again that this too shall pass, there will be times that we out, because the pendulum swing will mean we've had to focus on something that's been really difficult and time consuming and taken away from other aspects. But that's okay, as long as we have the construct to support ourselves in that. Because we can't control where it will swing. So it's so true. So there's so much more I could talk about, and we finish with 5 sort of key questions at the end. These can be short answers that come to mind, but before I go into that, where can we, I'll put it in the show notes as well, but where can we send our audience if they want to learn more about you and KidsXpress or anything else? Where can we send them? I think just go to our website, kidsexpress.org.au, and I'm on LinkedIn. I'd love an audience on LinkedIn in terms of being able to connect that. We've got our social media for KidsXpress as well. But you know what? Reach out and have a conversation. I love, obviously, I'm a bit of a chatter. I love having a conversation. So, if people want to go to our website, reach out. We all love a conversation here. We love connecting with people. So no matter what it is about, we'll connect with them.
It's a 10-year anniversary of Bracks, and we've relaunched with the classic white pair. We've also got new styles coming out super soon. We're donating $1 from every pair to mental health, currently to 1 in 5. You can find all of this at www.underbracks.com.
Great. Well, we'll have all of the links in the show notes. So anyone listening, go to the notes and send them a message. Reach out. Check out the website. So first question, what's your best childhood memory?
Ooh, best childhood memory. Best childhood memory. I actually mentioned it before. I was brought up on a farm, so being, one of the freedoms of being brought up on a farm is I had a pony from a really young age, and I'd be able to get on my pony and literally ride for hours and hours, and nobody knew where I was except I was somewhere in the hills. And I think one of my favorite memories was actually being on my pony Minka, and this was a regular occurrence, and particularly in lambing, riding at sunset and the lambs jumping everywhere because they go to sunset. So yeah, probably that's one of my favorite childhood memories. And again, that kind of represents the solo bit in terms of my life. And then yeah, that's probably one of my favorites, I think.
That's great, and a pretty unique memory as well, having that opportunity to have all of that space and opportunity to do that. That's so good.
Yeah, and something that you probably, hasn't got a screen. I don't
exactly
think so, that's in my mind. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely were no screens at that point. It's sort of a different way to grow up. What do you think's the biggest burden on mental health at the moment?
Oh, wow, that's a big question. What do I think is what I think is the biggest burden is the fact that we don't have enough help. 1 out of 3 psychologists, if you're going down a psychology path, that close their books purely for the demand. I think the fact that we did not see this we knew this, we were going to be here anyway, with or without COVID. So the fact that we didn't make decisions to bring more people into the helping professions, in whatever construct that looked like, to educate and empower people to be here for each other in a professional sense, I think that's a problem. We know that teachers are leaving the profession in droves. We need our children to have teachers that are supported to be educators, and what we need alongside those teachers are the mental health professionals, and I would include KidsXpress in there. So that, I think, is the biggest burden at the moment, both now and I would say in the medium term. We haven't solved that, so I think that's the biggest burden. From a perspective, there's just not enough people to help with the knowledge that will actually make a difference.
Yeah, no, I totally agree with what you're saying there.
Yeah,
it's a big thing that needs to change.
It does.
What is your personal definition of happiness?
Ooh, these are good questions. My personal definition of happiness. My personal definition of happiness is reflected in the people that I love.
Yeah, I love that.
Yeah. So knowing the definition of how safe I feel in certain relationships, how I interact with them, that to me defines my happiness within all its complexity. So that might mean I can be sad, I can be happy, I can be outrageous, I can be whatever I need to be within that. But that to me is happiness. Happiness is reflected in the people that I love and my relationships with them.
Yeah, no, that's a beautiful answer. That's such a nice one. What are you most afraid of?
Apart from spiders, because I really don't.
I can't stand them either. Yeah, shocking.
No. I'm most afraid of the fact that this conversation doesn't get heard, and that we don't do something about it. I'm most afraid that we continue to ignore what our children are screaming at us. And I feel chills when I say that, because I think there is a very, very real risk that we won't do it. And when I say we, I say each and every one of us, no matter who you are in society, we need to do something about this. So that is my greatest fear, that you and I could be having a conversation in the next 10, 15, 20 years and nothing changed.
Yeah. That's a big one.
Yeah.
Well, yep, let's pump this conversation out there and hope that it starts that change and keep doing what you're doing.
Yeah. And I think the good news is, though there is a lot of people now talking about children's mental health, the fact that you are, Nick, the fact that you're doing what you're doing, that you're role modeling, people are listening. We just need some decision makers to actually be listening and acting as well. But yeah, it's just so important. So important.
It is. So final question, what are you most proud of?
Oh, goodness me.
So I'll put you on the spot here.
What am I most proud of? I am most proud of, I'm looking at my office and I'm looking at the people that I have the absolute joy with to work alongside every day. And I can also, in my mind's vision, have all the people that support KidsXpress to do what we do and how we do it. And that includes the board and the co-founder and other people that do what they do. And I'm most proud of that. I'm in awe of the people I get to work alongside every single day, what they hold and how they hold it and what they witness for our children. I'm proud of the fact that I get to be part of that, and I'm proud of the fact that we create a safe place where children can heal. That's what I'm proud of.
All right, that's a pretty amazing answer, and yeah, great thing to finish on. So no, thank you so much for making the time to do it, Margo. It's been so great. I think we'll have to do a follow-up, and apologies for not only the stuff up last week but all the technical problems, but we got through it. And anyone listening, you're not going to see any of these technical problems, but we had to sort of change devices and have things shut down and blah blah blah. So we got there, but I really appreciate you making the time.
Oh, Nick, such a joy, such a wonderful opportunity. But and all those little hitches, that's just life.
That's life, exactly. Appreciate it.
All right, Nick, take care.
Thanks so much.
Thanks to Margo Ward for joining me today for Move Your Mind. And just another reminder that the Move Your Mind book is now available. You can find all of the links at nickbracks.com/book. You can join the Move Your Mind community at moveyourmind.me, and you can help support mental health by purchasing Under Bracks at www.underbracks.com.